Hi chickens, this one is a bit spontaneous. I'm not entirely sure whether I'm going to talk more about shadow work, art, or the inner child. I've got a mishmash of ideas in my head and I'm going to try and get them out in the best possible way. I want to start by saying that um, many of you have commented on what I'm wearing and complimented me for what I wear in my videos, and that's really nice because I love getting dressed. I've always been very sartorial and very interested in the different ways that people get dressed and the different ways that we can express different parts of who we are through what we wear. So um, I do a lot of vintage shopping and secondhand shopping, trying to find old treasures, trying to find things that nobody else has, kind of thing. And I like to mishmash and pay homage to different eras and stuff. And I think one key thing for me about getting dressed, I've always been very off the deep end when it comes to clothing. I've never been shy or bashful about wearing something that nobody else would dream of putting on their backs. In fact, somebody said to me once, if I had to buy clothing for you for birthday or Christmas, I'd go into a shop and I'd select the one thing that I truly believe that no other woman would be caught dead in, which is actually a bit of an understatement and a bit of a small town thing to say, but it is true that in comparison to a lot of the people in my peer group when I was growing up, I was interested in taking things to different levels and seeing what I could do with my hair and my makeup and my clothing. I shaved my head, in fact, when I was 17 or 18, and then I played with a mishmash of kind of mohawk styles and stuff like that. So it's not only my clothing, it's kind of the whole aspect of what I can do with my physical being has always been of interest to me, and I've dyed my hair every single colour. In fact, I think the only thing I haven't done with my hair, in fact, is dreads. Not because I don't love them, I do love them, but I don't think I could maintain them, and I don't think I could necessarily rock them. But when I was younger, I loved dreads. I was really attracted to boys with dreadlocks. My first few boyfriends had dreads. So yeah, I do love them, but I think they'd be a bit tough to maintain, and I'm not entirely sure I could do them justice. But yeah, big on crazy hairstyles, and I just enjoy that whole thing. And I feel like one thing that I really connect with when I get dressed of a morning is my inner child, because when I was a kid, um, there used to be a dressing up box in the school assembly hall, and the dressing up box was just full of bits and pieces, hats and like funny little outfits, policeman outfits and things like that. And there was a dress in there, and it was very fine and silky, and it had a many layered skirt, and it was bright orange, like a really garish orange. And it was like every third Wednesday or something, we were allowed to play dressing up. So instead of going out to the playground, we could go into the assembly hall and play dressing up. And I remember on those days kind of eyeing up my competition in the room, because I knew that there were a few girls that would want that dress as well, and they would just want to put that dress on and twirl around in it for an hour and pretend to be a princess. So if I wanted that dress, I'd have to get my ass to the assembly hall quickly and put it on. And the days when I actually got into that dress and I had that dress on for a solid hour, it was epic. It made me feel incredible. It was such an empowering garment, and I felt just so radical in it. And that is really a snapshot of something in my childhood um, that has kind of followed me all the way through into adulthood, or that I've allowed to come with me into adulthood. And, I'll always allow that to happen. I'll always be in love with garments, and I'll always be searching for little treasures, little vintage treasures, something that nobody else would be wearing, and thinking about how I can team that with other stuff. And it's a creative process, it's an artistic process, but it makes me feel a certain way, and it connects me to my inner child. I think a lot of people get confused about how it is that one connects with the inner child. It's actually not that difficult a process. It's not as abstract as you would think. I just like to think of it as that on some level, I am still the Kellyanne of 8 years old, or 9 years old, or even younger, 5 or 6 years old. There's still a part of me that has to adhere to those facets of my personality that tried to come out at that point in my life, and that were really formulated during that point in my life. And I still feel in many ways like that Kellyanne is still there. And if I don't give her some space to move around, if I don't give her that, that creative certainty that she needs, if I don't give her that feeling of the excitement of a project and the excitement of investing myself in something, then the inner child isn't very happy, the inner child becomes forlorn, and the inner child wants that excitement and wants that feeling of the beginning. My inner child is very attracted to the feeling of the beginning and the feeling of progressing and seeing progress. I always loved that when I was a kid. I always loved the feeling of a project. You know, I wouldn't write a 2-page story, I'd write a 6-page story or an 8-page story, and I would feel like for that time me and that project were just bound. We belonged to each other, and I still feel that now. So I need to give my inner child that, and I need to give my inner child the opportunity to express herself sartorially, express herself with what she wears. And I think my love for colour probably came from my mother. My mother used to dress my sister and I before we were old enough to make our own choices and kind of like actually construct an outfit ourselves. She used to dress us in similar types of clothing but not matching. So we weren't twins, there were 15 months between us, but she would dress us in like rah-rah skirts, and mine would be mint green and my sister's would be pink. Or, you know, we would both have the same style of tracksuit, but hers would be kind of like yellow flash stripes and mine would be pink or whatever. And my mum, I remember my mum used to, or my nanny used to make floral waistcoats, and my mum used to dress us in them sometimes with matching black leggings. And as a result of that, I've always had this thing for a pair of standard black leggings and something really loud on top. This is a present from a friend. A friend of mine brought it around for me, said she thought I might like it. She wasn't wrong. So yeah, I think that's where the love of colour stemmed from, and I've always kept that, and I've always noticed, I mean, I love black, I went through my goth phase, but I've always noticed that, you know, my love for combining colours and working with colours, and thinking about what they mean to me, and the decisions that I want to make with them, that kind of links me into my inner child. It makes me feel free, it makes me feel liberated, and it makes me feel like I feel lighthearted and adventurous and spontaneous when I'm doing that stuff. This is my inner child hair, apparently, today. So yeah, you know, I feel like it connects me to my inner child, and it is an artistic process in one way or another. And it's weird when you are interested in, I wouldn't necessarily say fashion. I am interested in fashion, but what I'm talking about here is personal style, not really fashion. Fashion to me is an art form, but it's also an industry, and I kind of compartmentalize the two. I know a lot about fashion, about designers and things, but when I'm talking about what I'm wearing, I'm really talking about personal style. And the interesting thing for me about personal style is that when I get dressed of a morning, there's a lot of other kind of cultural stuff that goes into that exploration. Like for example, when I was doing my hair and playing with the flowers and putting my bindi on, I was thinking about like Gwen Stefani and that whole 90s vibe, and then I was thinking about the Black Angels and the 70s kind of Haight Ashbury vibe, and then I put the Black Angels on. The Black Angels are not an old band, but they purposefully hark back to those times. So there's a lot of cultural stuff that comes into it, a lot of symbolism and associations that I think about just through getting dressed, which is really interesting because it means that I'm already being quite expansive, and I'm already thinking about like different eras and different situations and different figures in history and stuff like that. So yeah, it's really cool, and I really hugely enjoy it. And I feel that part of the process of relinquishing the ego and relinquishing control over any form of creative expression that you do, particularly when that creative expression is intended for self-development or emotional healing, is that, you know, it's really about getting in touch with the inner child. Because when you were a kid and you were deeply invested in the creative process, you know, when you were young, before you realized that you could have this recognition and that there were certain expectations and that there was certain competition, and you know that somebody could create a piece of art which might be viewed as generally better or worse than another piece of art, and all this kind of consideration which weighs heavy on the ego. When you're a kid, you just lose yourself in that creative endeavor and you're one with it, and the joy, the absolute abandon that comes out of that feeling of being completely weightless and just so enthralled by the moment, and not thinking about what came before, not thinking about what came after, but just really purely enjoying that feeling of creating something. You need to go back to that, and that can be quite difficult. I feel that a lot of the time when we talk about doing art for shadow work, I was talking with a client about this morning, when we talk about doing art to actually help us with our shadow work and help to bring the unconscious stuff out and help to kind of pull back together all of these disowned parts of ourselves and work through them and understand them. it's easy to say, oh, just do some art, you know, just do some automatic writing, but it's really hard to do that when you can't kind of let go of the ego concerns, when you can't really think, if you've never really, for example, done any art just for yourself, just to see where it goes, just in private, just to get something out, shake something out, vent something, you know, vent your frustration, or even just to see how you feel about something. I've done that many times when I can't work out how I think or feel about something. I'll often go into the artistic endeavour and then I'll stand back from it and be like, oh, okay, that's how I felt, kind of thing. That's how I feel, or return to it in a few days' time and decipher it. You know, you need to interpret your inner mythology. That's kind of the whole thing. Is that something is going on within you, some story is unraveling, which could be linked to your personal history or could be linked to your sense of spiritual evolution, whatever it is, cognitive distortions that are coming up because you've spent years going through the same pattern and not really addressing it. All of this kind of stuff can be discovered when you actually just let go of the ego expectation of what making art is supposed to be. And Danny and I touched on this in the video that I did with him, I think yesterday or the day before, I can't remember. But, you know, letting go of that stuff and just recognizing that it's a free space. And when you connect with your inner child, when you really connect with what your inner child would have wanted and what really switched your inner child on, what really excited your inner child, you know, when you connect with those things and you give your inner child what it wants, then it will be much easier to do art in relation to shadow work or in relation to self-expression, and it is going to feel right because you're going to be like feeding your inner child, and that's so important. I would suggest a few things. I don't know how many of you know about sand play therapy, but it's a really interesting technique. It was invented by a Jungian analyst called Dora Kauf in the 1950s. And basically it works on the premise that there are a bunch of objects and you place them, or the therapist place them into the sand tray, and then the patient uses those objects, as many or as few as they like, to actually construct a visual representation of what's going on in the inner terrain. And this could be with regard to the dynamics of the central relationship in the patient's life, or this could be with regard to bad dreams the patient is having, the way the patient feels about their mother. You know, it could go on and on like this. But basically, it's just the premise of using different objects and allowing the patient or the client to arrange them in a certain fashion in relation to each other to build a world which represents how they feel inside. And this is something that when I discovered it a few years ago it really felt right, and it really felt kind of revolutionary. And it is about constructing an image of your inner mythology. It is about considering your own legacy and your own role in your life. And I think there are a few ways that you can do this. I mean, what I'm planning to do when I actually move to a bigger place and I have more available space, I am going to be collecting objects and images and knickknacks and things, because I've been thinking of doing this for a very long time. I'm really interested in sand play, and I do have, you know, lots of little knickknacks and bits and pieces that can be used in that kind of process. And of course I have an altar, and you know, I often feel that when I set up my altar with certain objects and stuff, it's more about what I seek to manifest and how I'm linking up with the seasons, rather than considering the confines of my own mind. But there's a very blurred line there with the altar setup for me. Quite often I will put things on there that are representing how I'm feeling, or that are representing things that I feel need to come to the surface, or even things that I don't understand and I'm confused by myself, and I want that representation. So with the altar, there's kind of there's a clash with regard to what we would or would not use objects for, or in my case anyway. But yeah, there is that blurred line. But I am planning on collecting objects and things of that nature that I feel would be very good for sand play, because I would love to help people in my life through helping them to use this technique and helping them to understand what, you know, how much it can benefit talking therapy. But I think there are a few other ways that you can do it. Firstly, sometimes I recommend that people use tarot. If they are adept at tarot, if they own a tarot deck, even if they don't really know what the definitions are, you can look at the pictures and decide which pictures would actually paint a portrait of how you're feeling at this moment, or what you're confused about, or, you know, the premise of the relationship that you're concerned about, whatever it is. Tarot can be a really good, useful, alternative form of sand play, whereby you use the 78 images to construct some kind of representation of your inner landscape on some level. And I guarantee you that if you do have a tarot deck and you're listening to me right now and your ears are pricking up and you're thinking, I could do this, I guarantee you that the results will be very surprising. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean, it really can go somewhere interesting when you're consciously selecting cards in accordance with what you want to say, or how you feel, or what you're trying to actually express that's difficult or impossible, in fact, to express in words. And remember, you need to relinquish the ego. You need to let yourself do this from the inner child's perspective, okay? So no one's going to see it. No one's going to judge it. No one's watching you. No one's waiting for this grand masterpiece that you're going to make. This is just you allowing yourself to be absorbed and one with the moment. And that's really important when you start doing something like this. You can also do it using collage. Now, collage is a modality that I hugely, hugely favour. And I really would like to show you guys some of my work on the channel sometime and kind of keep that going, because collage is one way that I feel that I have, been doing sand play for a very long time. And you can make vision boards, you can make mood boards, you can do scrapbooking. You don't just need to do collage with a kind of an overtly artistic quality in mind for the work. You can do it with regard to thinking about what you want to manifest, thinking about what you want to get rid of, scrapbooking about your family, scrapbooking about the month, that kind of thing. But I feel that when we use collage in association with the sand play technique, what we're really doing is we're looking to use different images and different words to create that overarching image of our terrain, the overarching image of the problem, the confusion, the fear, whatever it is. And that can glean some very interesting results. You can also use crystals for this work if you're into crystals and you have a large collection of crystals and you understand their properties. Even if you don't understand all of their properties, you can associate different colours or the different textures of the crystals with how you feel about the situation as it is at that moment. And that would be a good idea, to use crystals, instead of different objects, different knickknacks and stuff. And one thing I wanted to say about automatic writing is that automatic drawing works in very much the same way. So if you feel daunted by automatic writing, or you don't really think it's going to be helpful to you ultimately, automatic drawing also is a very interesting idea. Again, you need to relinquish this feeling of, oh, I'm going to be judged, or it needs to be perfect, or why did I draw that, or oh my god, what if somebody sees this? This is inner child work. So if you find it difficult to connect with your inner child, I strongly suggest that you spend some time just contemplating, thinking about those moments in your childhood, no matter how scattered they were, no matter whether or not there are key memories attached to them or key events attached to them, or whether it's just like one Wednesday in the afternoon when you closed your eyes in a ray of sun and just felt, the relaxation or whatever. Try and think about the times in your childhood when you really did feel switched on and you really did feel as though it was just abandon, if you see what I mean. It was that relinquishing, it was that absorbing it and just being in your bliss. And that's what you want to get to now. You can allow your inner child that room to move around, and it's very important that you do, because your inner child is being stifled if you're not doing that. So with automatic writing and drawing, again, just try to, particularly with automatic drawing or painting, try to just go into a state of trance, because I think as children we did that so much. I certainly did. I used to go into full-on daydreams, trances, especially when I was creating, and it was just so pleasurable. It was so blissful. And I don't think that we give ourselves that now, and it's so important when we are looking to actually shake off the bonds of expectation and ego and whatnot in order to create art that we can really stand back from and see, oh, okay, this is what I was trying to express. This is what I really want. This is what's underneath those surface concerns. And if you're clinging on too tightly to the ego stuff, and the ego is by no means all bad. I've spoken before about my understanding of the definition of the word ego from a Freudian perspective and Jungian perspective, and I'm not trying to suggest that ego is in any way synonymous with fear or synonymous with restriction. But what I'm trying to say is that when you're making art with a desire to actually look at yourself on a much deeper level, then you're going to need to scrape those parts of the ego that restrain you, and parts of the ego that make you think it's got to be good, it's got to be right, it's got to be what I had in mind. You've got to scrape all that crap back and go with spirit. Trust spirit, let spirit guide you, let your essence guide you. Is so important for this kind of work. And revisit your art as well, and don't worry about necessarily having a plan in mind for any piece of it when you start it at all. You know, I think a lot of people buy a book, for example, if they're going to do collage or they're going to do journaling, they buy a book and they think, I'm going to fill up this book with all of my thoughts and feelings and fears. I'm going to fill it up, and they treat it like a project. I'm going to fill it up as in I'm going to get to the end of it and it's going to be a thing that I've done. It's going to be a thing that I've accomplished. It's so important that you don't think about it like that. In fact, if you feel like you're bringing this real project angle to it, I would suggest not buying a book and instead just painting or drawing, collaging, writing, whatever, on separate bits of paper as and when you want to do it, and just putting it together in some kind of a folder, you know, like a folder for loose leaf paper, cheap paper folder, something like that, or in a drawer, rather than buying a project book and buying materials and all of this kind of thing, because I feel that that's another place where the ego kind of gets us on to this sense of expectation and this sense of the grandiosity of what we're doing and this sense of accomplishing, finishing, showing, affirming to ourselves, yes, I'm creative, yes, I've done all of this work, this inner work that's expressed itself in the tangible realm. And I think that can get quite complicated, and that can be another way that ego can get its claws into us. So create as and when it comes to you in the moment. Don't pressure yourself. Don't buy like a big 500 page book and think to yourself, now I'm going to accomplish, now I'm going to finish, now I'm going to get to the end, I'm going to fill it up. When I hear that, from people with books of shadows or creative books, I often think, well, just make sure that you're not coming at this from ego territory to the point where you're not going to recognize that you need to be lost in it and not worry about how much has been done, and not worry about the amount and about the quantity and about what that means in terms of who you are, because that's not what it's about. With me, my inner child really responded to just investing. I just wanted to invest. It wasn't about finishing it and showing it and getting that praise. It was about like not abandoning it, but actually developing it, flourishing with it. So always know that you are working with your inner child. You're working in allowance. You're letting your inner child come in and you're holding its hand. You know, don't be in resistance to it, and really think about what your inner child would want. What did your inner child used to love doing? What did your inner child enjoy and relish about the creative process? What was the majesty of it for you at that time? And, you know, that is still the majesty of it for you now. You just don't realise it. You just need to get in touch with it. And revisit your art, you know, long afterwards. And don't stand back from your art. This is what I would say. Don't stand back from what you've done in relation to shadow work, like automatic writing, collage, whatever, and try and find an answer. Like try and have an aha moment right there, right in front of it as soon as you've done it, or even while you're doing it. I often feel illumination is in the act, and I feel that a lot can come out of the process of just sitting there in that therapeutic, cathartic situation where you're giving yourself that time to create. A lot of stuff can come out of that, and it won't always come necessarily out of what you're doing and seeing what you're doing and thinking, oh, I've had a light bulb moment now. It won't always happen like that. Sometimes it will just be the case that you will be allowing your mind to think in a different way, just as you're painting, as you're having that time, as you're relaxing, as you are pushing away other concerns and giving yourself this time with this process. Sometimes you'll just start to think about things that maybe you haven't had time to think about, maybe you haven't felt comfortable enough to think about, and that stuff will come up, and that's okay too. You know, you just got to let it be an organic process and understand that it won't be the same each time. And understand also that if you stand back from something you've done and you think, what the bejesus is this all about, then that is awesome. Do not try and unravel it all. Do not try and solve the riddle immediately. Don't let that ego-based distortion come in where you think, right, now I've done it, it must provide me with an answer. You know, now I've completed it and the canvas is full, I must know what's going on within me. This must be, you know, the answer to my whole inner mythology. Sometimes when you come back to something after a very long time away from it, or when you actually see how you've progressed with these various different things you've done artistically to try and express some part of the shadow, or to try and hone self-development in some way, it's actually the distance from it in time that allows you to have these fresh insights. So I would say just don't try and grasp hold of the answer straight away, and accept the work for what it is. Stand back from it and accept it for catharsis, accept it as therapy, accept it as the opening, as the willingness, as kind of the exit wound of what started. What you complete with is this majesty of this thing that you've put out into the external world. And It wasn't for show, it wasn't so that you could prove something to yourself, it was nothing like that. It's an egoless practice, which is really just concerned with you being able to externalize what's internal in the most beautiful and nurturing and spiritually centered way possible. Much love, blessed be.